Howdy remarketing fans, and welcome back. As we've explained before, audience characteristics are the foundation of your segments. And your segments, like we've explained, are these pools or sections of your total website audience. Understanding which characteristics give off the most amount of user intent is essential to creating effective remarketing campaigns. Not every business is going to get as much information from a specific characteristic as another business. Every business has to analyze the characteristics that we're tracking and determine, what is this telling me about my audience? What is this telling me about the intent, this person with this characteristic displaying this sort of action? What type of person is that in relation to my business, in relation to the conversion goals that I have set? In this section, I want to start breaking down different characteristics. I'm going to show you a whole bunch of different standard characteristics just to give you a sense of how complicated and how expansive remarketing and building out these segments using these characteristics could get. So in our agency, and what I've been teaching with remarketing, is to break down your characteristics by two broader categories: external and internal. Let's take a quick look at the difference in those two different sorts of characteristics. Internal characteristics are factors and characteristics of your website visitors that are internal to your business, that are internal to your brand, that are internal, or they are manifest, or they're results of your specific content, what you've done. They're inherent to you. Internal characteristics are typically more predictive of user intent, meaning they give off more buzz, more of that brand buzz. They tell you more what that person is likely to do next, because these characteristics are manifest from your website, landing pages, and brand content. We're going to take a look at a bunch of different characteristics in a second, and we'll break them down by internal and external. External characteristics are characteristics that are not, and factors that are not specifically related to you, to your company, to your brand, to your website, your landing pages, your content, etc. External characteristics can be very useful, and oftentimes they are very predictive of what that person is likely to do next. External characteristics are especially useful as moderators, and we're going to speak about moderators and what that means when it comes to remarketing segments in the next section. But since these factors are external to your company, they're generally less predictive of user intent. And this makes a lot of sense if you think about it. When you're manipulating the content, for example, one of the classic internal characteristics, one of the most important characteristics that you could track to build out these segments, is which page the person was spending his time viewing. So you constructed this page. You decided that this page is going to talk about your horse breeding services, or whatever it may be. You're an electrician, so you're talking about installing LED light bulbs across, a client's house. So if a person spends a specific amount of time engaging in content that you've manipulated, you could learn a lot about what that person's interested in. An external characteristic is something like a person's browser. If he's using Chrome, Safari, Firefox, IE, take your pick. But because you have less of a hand in that specific content, in that specific factor, in that construct, it makes sense that which of those factors play in, which browser that person's using, the specific variation of that characteristic is a better way to say it. It makes sense that that's less predictive of what that user is going to do once he's on your site. So let's go take a look at a bunch of different characteristics, and these are really the staples of all the different sorts of things that you could track. And we're going to see in the coming sections that many, if not most of these, are not going to be relevant to your company, and they're not even going to make sense even if they were relevant to use in remarketing. Because once we talk about strategies, once we talk about managing characteristics and managing these segments, you're going to see that you're going to have to be selective and choose the right characteristics to build the right segments, to build the right remarketing campaigns. So one of the classics is pages per visit. The number of pages a person viewed per visit. Is a person viewing 5 pages every time he comes? Is he viewing just 1 page and bouncing every time he comes? You have affinity audience. We're going to talk about affinity audiences. These are third-party data aggregated audiences that try to predict that this person is connected up to with a certain type of people, group, audience affiliation. This could be an affinity audience could be horror movie lovers, or romance novel lovers, or cooking show lovers. Those are affinity audiences. Day of the week, that's a simple one. Location, where that person is when he's using your site. which forms a person on your site submitted. Now, typically we think of remarketing as to get somebody to fill out a form, but we're going to talk about some sophisticated strategies that include actually paying for ads, bidding in the remarketing auction to remarket to people who have already converted on your site. Pages viewed, this is one of the, like we said, one of the staples. Which pages on the site did this person actually view? We have number of visits. How many times in total has this person been to my site? Products in cart. This is the classic cart abandoners. Not only did he abandon the cart, which would fall under which pages he visited or which pages he bounced from, but which specific products, if you're running an e-commerce store, did that customer, potential customer, that user leave in his cart? In-market segment. This is another collection of data aggregated by third-party networks that tries to predict which products or services a person is likely to actually be in the market for, whereas an affinity audience is what type of people, what type of group, how do I affiliate myself with. It doesn't necessarily talk about commercial intent. In-market segments attempts at commercial intent. Am I in the market for a luxury car? Am I in the market for a water cooler? Am I in the market for a new microphone? Etc., etc. Scroll depth. If you remember in the very first video, we talked about really cool ways to track scroll depth. This is not an out-of-the-box analytics. It's a special plugin that I'm going to teach you how to add to analytics using custom code to track how far on the page a user scrolls. Social shares is a person coming to your site and is a user sharing your pages, your blog posts, your content on social media. Which social networks are they being shared on? Once again, I want you to start thinking about how these actions would represent the type of person or type of customer this person is likely to be for use. As we're talking about these characteristics, I want you to start thinking about that. Is this a metric? Is this a characteristic? Is this a factor that would make sense for me to track? That would make sense, that would predict future behavior? So think about that and how it relates to your business as we go through these. Device. Is a person using a mobile, tablet, or desktop device to access your site? Screen size. Once again, that's kind of an abstract one, but there are plenty of businesses where this characteristic actually makes a difference. Time on site. Here's a big one. How long is this guy or girl or user spending on your site when he comes? You could also go further and talk about average time on site per visit. Time of day. Is it morning, afternoon, evening? With AdWords, you could actually track the minute of the day, hour of the day. It's quite incredible, if not a little creepy. Products viewed. Sometimes somebody wouldn't necessarily have added something to the cart, but what about products viewed? Which products these people are spending time viewing? Once again, of course, that's specific to e-commerce. Not all of you guys are e-commerce sites. Some of you absolutely are, I've no doubt. Parental status. Sorry about the misspelling. I'm not going to go back and do this whole thing over again, but I don't mean parental statues. I mean parental status. So Google could track, is this person a parent or not? Oftentimes it's unknown, but parental status. Browser. What type of browser is that person using? Like we spoke about before, you have all the different types of browsers. It's hard to imagine a case where that makes a difference, but once again, that's a characteristic that you could track. Number of page views, total number of page views. That's different than average page views per visit. It's also different than which pages the person viewed. These are all different sorts of characteristics. Traffic source, where did that person come from? It's a very interesting one. We'll talk about traffic source in just a minute once we get through the rest of these. Age, how old is the person? I'm sure lots of businesses, and it's very easy to come up with examples where age would make quite a significant difference. Time since last visit. That's another good one. Sometimes, and this is going to be a really cool one, because you might not want to run a remarketing campaign the moment after a person leaves your site. So that's, we've all been exposed. We've all been to a new website, and literally 5 minutes later, we're getting bombarded with remarketing ads. That might not be the best technique. You might want to have an audience modifier, time since last visit, to be a little bit more tactful. So you could use time since last visit as a modifier by saying, I want to target people who are males who viewed at least 5 pages on my site, but they haven't been to the site in the last 3 days. So that's a cool way to only have your remarketing ads start running to people after a 3-day period has elapsed since they've been on the site last. Bounce rate. Here's a big one. You might not want to retarget to people who have a high bounce rate. A bounce, if you don't know anything about Google Analytics, which you might not, a bounced visitor is somebody who only views 1 page but doesn't view a second page. Phone calls. There are sophisticated ways to track phone calls from ads from any source to your company. So do you want to remarket to people who called in? There might be a lot of examples where that might be very useful. Now let's start thinking about this idea of external and internal characteristics. Now that you know the difference between external and internal characteristics, let's take a look at some of these. We don't need to go through every one, and start identifying which characteristic is internal and which characteristics are external. Before we do that together, I would recommend pausing the video and just going over in your head or circling which ones you think are which. That would be a good exercise, and then we could see kind of how your results and my results match up. All right, let's take a look. So day of the week is an easy one. It's an external characteristic. It doesn't have anything to do with you per se. It has to do with that user and what decisions he made to browse the internet. Once again, browser, that's another good external one. Parental status is another good external characteristic. Location is a good external characteristic. Time of day is an external characteristic. Gender is a good external characteristic. Age is a good external characteristic. Screen size, even affinity audience, and in-market segments, these are external characteristics. Now let's take a look at some of the internal characteristics. So number of page views. This is going to be something which is very predictive of future user behavior. If somebody's consistently engaged with your site, he's likely to continue to be consistently engaged unless some sort of variable, external variable changes dramatically. Pages per visit, another great engagement metric. Scroll depth, more engagement. Social shares, not only engagement, but what sort of engagement. This is teaching me about the personality of this person. These are internal characteristics about the content that you promote, the content that you manipulate in a good way. Form submitted, internal. How appealing was the offer that somebody submitted a form? Products in cart, same idea. Time on site, another engagement metric. Number of visits. This tells you about how appealing and how interesting the information on your site is if a person keeps coming back. Bounce rate, once again, phone calls, internal. Products viewed, internal. Devices, external. Pages viewed, internal. Time since last visit is internal. Devices, external. Now, if you notice, I didn't do anything about traffic source because the traffic source is interesting. In my mind, and how we treat traffic source in the agency, this is kind of an overlap characteristic. It's a really cool idea because on one hand, where that person came from, if it came from a Google search, if it came from a Facebook post or a Facebook ad, if it came from even a print or television or radio advertisement, if it came from a word of mouth referral, that's not really a factor necessarily of your doing, right? But maybe not. Maybe it's not so clear. A lot of the, if you think about it one step further, a lot of the work that you do as a marketer, as an advertiser, as a business owner, as an entrepreneur is creating your presence on the internet, in your field, in your industry, amongst your peers, amongst colleagues, amongst thought leaders in your industry. If you ran, and even on a more simple level, if you ran a Facebook ad and that Facebook ad was really appealing and somebody went and through their newsfeed saw the Facebook ad, they clicked the Facebook ad that came to your website, then I would say that's a very clear overlap between external and internal factors. Because on one hand, yeah, you didn't really have anything to do with the fact that he's on Facebook right now, but you manipulated the content that he saw. You paid for an ad. The same thing goes for an organic listing. If you worked by promoting your website and working on your SEO, and you got an organic, somebody searched a competitive term, you showed up number one, you had a great headline, great description, somebody clicked your site, so your effort and your activity and what you've done really transcended the boundaries of your own specific website, and it helped shape the path that potential customer took to get to you in the first place. So traffic source is something very interesting. You could learn a lot about where these people came from. Now, once again, not every business is going to care a whit about traffic source. Whether they came through social, they came through word of mouth, they came through direct, they came through organic, they came through an email campaign, they came through a Twitter ad, it might not matter. And it's very likely that it doesn't matter. To be honest, with our business and the different campaigns that we run, we do some remarketing campaigns, we don't differentiate with traffic source because we've tested that data and we know that it's not enough of a factor. We're not going to say that at no confidence interval, at no p-value, if you're familiar with p-values, there's no factor, there's no difference when it comes to traffic source. But for us, we know that our data typically shows that there's not enough of an impact for it to make sense to segment out our remarketing audiences in that way. And the reason why I'm telling you this is because that concept of being impactful enough is going to be very important in the next couple sections when we start talking about developing a manageable remarketing strategy, planning that out, plotting that out, and then ultimately creating those campaigns, using those segments, launching the campaigns live, and optimizing. So let's jump into the next section. I'll catch you guys on the other side. Thanks again for watching, and I look forward to talking to you soon in a couple of minutes.